Hello, this is my updated Dex Mage build guide for 2026. There are some key differences from the previous build guide, and we're just going to get started and we're going to go through everything from start to finish. So this is very new player friendly. If you don't know Dex Mage or haven't played very much Mortal Online, this will get you started for everything PvP and PvP related for a Dex Mage. If you don't know, this is Mortal Data. It's a website used for builds on Mortal, and right away in character creation, you want to go full Shivra on your race. Okay, Shivra. You're going to set the age to age 31. And I'm not going to explain exactly why we're setting all the parameters the way we are, but this will definitely get you started. And this is the meta Dex Mage build, so please just follow along. You're going to set the height to the minimum, which is going to be 158. And you want to set your weight to skinny. And you want to be the bottom of skinny, okay? So not like in the middle of skinny, you want to be at the bottom of skinny. Now we're going to set our strength to minimum, and we're going to max out your dex, and then your int. Then you're gonna max out con, and don't worry about this too much. And then psi with the leftover points, and you can get a few points over because your rings will be giving you more stats as well. We're gonna go ahead and do our clade gifts really quick because this is gonna affect our stats. This bottom tree, you basically want to grab everything except for Naiad, which is optional. You definitely want to get Stalker, Night Vision, Alvar Insight, and get Resolved for the +4 psi. Coming up here, you'll get Scholar, Vitalist, Mind Shield, and Thaumaturge. And these 17 Clade points, I'd say, are all mandatory for PvP. And the last 3 points, you can kind of do what you want and play with the points and move them around as you change your build and change where you play on the map. Naiad's pretty solid, especially if you don't have swimming. If you already have swimming, it doesn't really make a big difference to your gameplay. And I'd say Faunus for the Butchery Yield, this is a very good one. If you're a Butcher, Dendrologist is nothing good, but Petrology 2 or Stone Shaper 2, this was a very good one as well. So play with the points, do what you want. So if you do a lot of mining, obviously take these ones, or you can also do like Planet Shaper and Stone Shaper for the extra profession points. Whichever works for you. I would probably do like Faunus and Petrology. Okay, masteries. So right away, I'm going to try to go through this in order for priority. I would say the highest priority is getting this 4 raw dex right here. And then you want to get the int tree here, start the tree, get the concentration here. And then I would do spell power and then max out the mana and the mana regeneration and then the mana cost all spells. You can do it in a different order, but definitely get the concentration early, get the dex early. And then if you want to go like further in the tree, you can, but that's really high mastery and I wouldn't recommend doing that until after you get your defensive masteries. So on your defensive masteries, you want to get the con, you want to get all the HP. And then I would recommend getting this damage resistance against all AI. It's just good for PvE and there's a lot of pets in the game. So definitely a pretty high value node right there. And then definitely get these raw physical resistances. And I would say like this is probably bare minimum for PvP. And then there's kind of some free wells where you go with it. I would definitely recommend doing the con, do the psych, and do the int down here. I would also definitely recommend getting all these magic resistance nodes. And a lot of high mastery dex mages will elect to get like these elementalism defense nodes right here because elementalism is not affected by your magic resistance. So these are pretty high value. I'd say that's like basically all the highest value nodes. Like these thirst ones are pretty good as well, but we're going to be getting to that. And I don't think it's mandatory for this build. Unlike a foot fighter, I would say these are mandatory for sure. So definitely these spell power nodes, the necromancy and the ecumenical one, these are pretty good. If you farm a lot, I guess you can do like these damage delta AI as well down here. But these spell power ones are pretty good. And then the ecumenical mana cost and the necromancy mana cost. Now, obviously don't take these. If you don't do a lot of necromancy, don't take the necromancy ones, obviously. So this one's kind of up to you and your playstyle and your content and whatever you do. But we're going to leave this as like that for now. And we're going to come back to the stats. Since we got a few more stats from our masteries, we're going to fix this up. So you should set at 131 dex. And you'll have 92 con, right here, 92, 116, and then dump the rest of the points into psi. And I'm doing like -6 because you will be getting extra attribute points from your rings, which we'll go over later. Now the action points is probably the most complicated part of the whole build, so please pay attention to this. Just going down the list, you'll definitely want max sprinting, you'll want max combat maneuvering, and then you'll want enough armor training to fit the meta armor set, which I will be explaining, but just know that the meta armor set is roughly 8.2 kilograms. So that is like 50 points. How many is that? Yeah, 8.2 kilograms right here. So you'll want bare minimum 50 points in armor training. Now, generally take a few more points in armor training, just in case like you loot a kit off a guy and it's like a little heavier that you can wear it. So 50 is bare minimum. And then we're still taking 100 combat maneuvering for the stamina regen. However, you can make the argument that you can drop this down to 50 as well. Okay, combat techniques. You want to max defensive stance. We're not going to touch domestication and endurance. However, they are very good depending on your playstyle. So you can shift some points into them easily. So one basic recommendation is like 50 taming. If you don't have a taming neck, I highly recommend getting a taming neck. But having 50 taming is very useful on the fly for taming things. And then creature control, you can have like roughly 30 to 40. You can ride just about every mountable creature, most mountable tamed mounts in the game. So if you do a lot of solo adventuring and you lose your mount, this is very, very helpful. Endurance is also very, very helpful. However, I will not be fitting that into the build today. But if you do a lot of solo content in the dungeons where there's no mounts, the extra stamina from endurance is very, very helpful. Magic skills, this will be maxed. Ecumenical, this will be maxed. You can make the argument of dropping it down to say 62 or 79. Sorry, for Flame Strike, which has been nerfed several times, so I don't really recommend this as a breakpoint. 62 is for Fulminate, and then 50 is for Magic Reflect. Honestly, I just recommend you stick it to 100 and you keep it there. However, if you exclusively play in dungeons, then you can make the argument of not taking Earthquake at 100 Ecumenical. However, I just recommend that you take 100 Ecumenical, that way you can play this build everywhere comfortably, as Earthquake will be your main defense against Mounteds. Then Elementalism, I recommend you take 95 Elementalism and 95 Intensification. This is so you have access to all of your PvE walls, as well as Lightning Bolt, which is a very, very strong spell. It's arguably the strongest AoE in the game. It has a lot of uses, especially in big fights. Very, very, very good spell. You can push it to 100, which there isn't a whole lot of useful spells in the last 5 points, except for like Ice Barrier, which you can also cast at 95. And also on your Dex Mage, I don't really recommend putting yourself in a position to be using Ice Barrier anyways. So 95 for Elementalism, and then Necromancy, definitely set this to 100. And Mental Training, this will be 100. Concentration will be 100. Mental Focus 100. Mental Offense at 100. And Vitalism will be at 100. And Potion UT, if you do not have the Thirst Masteries, I recommend setting this to 50 or as many points as you have left over. Set it to 50 unless you take these 2 Thirst Masteries. Then if you elect to take those, I would recommend setting this to 30. And you will have leftover points, so you can throw that into a bunch of different things. Some optional things I would recommend is Swimming. Swimming is obviously best in slot if you live or play near a POI with water. Blocking is seriously underrated and actually very, very good. However, it has kind of fallen out of the meta due to the new playstyle of popping Brace and healing yourself. However, blocking is still very, very good. But there's ways to get around not having blocking, like such as using a shield. Endurance, pretty solid. The passive regen is pretty good. The extra stamina is really good. And then obviously Domestication, which we already talked about. Or you can get extra armor training, and then you will have access to wearing some of the heavier patterns, which especially as a newer player, I would highly recommend wearing a heavier, beefier, tankier armor set than the meta set that we'll be discussing. So you can definitely pump extra points into this and wear like a laminated set, or you can wear like Iron Fur backing, which is also like heavier, which will help you like stay alive a little bit longer so you can learn the game. And that should pretty much do it for action skills. But we went over all of what I would consider to be the mandatory action skills. And then one more that I missed is if you do a lot of big group content, then you can definitely consider taking Spiritism at 95 or 90 or like 92, anywhere between like 90 and 100. I would not recommend taking Spiritism under 90, but 90 to 100, so you have access to Mental Projectile, which is a very good offensive spell, as well as Resurrect, which is obviously very, 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 very good in groups. This is the only way to revive a player without using a priest. So very, very, very strong utility spell right there is Resurrect. Now onto profession skills, I would highly recommend, especially as a new player, to have armor crafting. You can set it to 70, and then soft armor crafting also at 70. And while we are only going to be discussing the meta armor set, the laminated armor sets are also pretty good on a Dex Mage, which, you know what, we'll talk about that when we get to armor as well. So I would say like bare minimum, I would say 70 armor crafting, 70 soft armor crafting, and then you can consider doing more, either 100 points or also picking up laminated and plate armor crafting so that you can craft for your friends or for some of these off meta kits. So we'll just set those to 70 now. And then for armor crafting, you would need to have maxed animal materials to craft the most mage kits as well as the meta mage kit. So you'll want animal materials. You can do 70, just do 100, especially if you do butchering. You will need arthropod produce lore so that you can use blood silk and iron silk, which are the meta backing for mage armor. And you will also want scales lore, as this is the meta material for mage armor as well. Okay, and zoology, you will probably want max mammalia. However, it's not really necessary. And then depending on where you play, so if there's a lot of if there are a lot of terrorbird tamers or a lot of tamers wherever you PvP regularly, then I would recommend picking up the zoology lore associated with that. So if you fight like terrorbirds, then you would want aves. Or if there's like hunter lizards, you wouldn't want reptilia. Now, what you decide to do with your leftover points is entirely up to you. I think engineering is always a very, very, very strong pick, especially for your main like PvP character. Management is also extremely solid. And honestly, that's about it I want to touch on for profession skills, but I would highly, highly recommend getting armor crafting above all things for your, like, if this is going to be your main character. All right, so I'm going to jump into the game here, and this is my Dex Mage. So just showing off some of the stats. I don't have my rings on, so my stats are not maxed out, but they are maxed out when I put my rings on. I'm skinny, min height 31, and just to show you using the current meta set, plate scales blood silk. This is the current meta set. So Rhizar Berserker helmet and legs, and then Syndremic guard, arms, and chest. And all of these are going to be plate scales blood silk. And currently in the state of the game in Maryland, plate scales are fairly easy to get and pretty strong. And blood silk is not as easy to get and pretty expensive. So this is the meta like mage kit. I would say like this is roughly like, I don't know, 100 and 150 gold in material cost just to make. So for a new player, this is not going to be the most accessible armor kit in the game. There is arguably better doing Panzer scales blood silk. However, on Maryland, Panzer scales, while they are accessible, they're not very easy to get. So logistically, they're very difficult and expensive. From what I'm told about the content of Sarduka, which we'll be releasing here in like the next month or so, is that Panzer scales are accessible on Sarduka and you can get them a lot easier. So I'm expecting that the meta mage kit will move to Panzer scales blood silk after the release of Sarduka. However, for now, since that is an unknown, plate scales blood silk, and this will probably always be significantly cheaper than the Panzer scales blood silk. Some alternatives I would recommend. Plate scales are pretty cheap, so I would basically always recommend going at least plate scales. But for backing, you can use iron silk, you can use iron wool, which I don't really recommend, or iron fur. Iron fur is very, very cheap. So you should have no problems making plate scales iron fur, or or husk weave, which is also a newer material, which I would probably recommend over iron fur. They're like pretty much equivalent though. But husk weave and iron fur are both very cheap, and you can find them available on the market. Plate scales as well, you can find them available on the market. And those sets should be effective enough to use in PvP and cheap enough that even a new player could get 100 re-gears fairly easily. And if you can't, you could probably ask your guildmates and they will be able to supply that for you. One last note regarding the armor sets, you can mix and match the armors, and I'll go over all of the different armor types really quickly. However, the set that I showed you is the meta kit, but you can feel free to mix and match the pieces with other soft armors and other laminated armors, okay? So regarding PvP metas, there are different weight classes. Some of the soft armors are lighter than the other patterns in the soft armor. The Syndremic guard armor is one of the, if not the heaviest soft armor. You can wear some of the other soft armors that are lighter than Syndremic guard. However, if you find yourself dying early or if you do not have a whole lot of PvP experience, then I really do not recommend it. However, you can mix and match some of the pieces also for roleplay purposes. I highly recommend that. Syndremic Guard, the set that I showed you, is fairly in the middle. It is the heaviest soft armor, but it's not as heavy as the laminated armors. So for laminated armors, there's Curide Splinted, and there is Calardian Banded. I would say, yes, you can go ahead and wear the laminated armors, especially if you find yourself dying in PvP very quickly. And regarding the materials, you can just go ahead and use the same exact materials that I recommended for using the Meta Mage kit you can use on these laminated kits. To get a little bit tankier, you will be a little bit tankier, but you will have less mana regen. And if you do find yourself not dying in PvP or needing more mana regen in the middle of the fight, you can use some of these lighter soft armor patterns, such as the Ranger armor, or you have the option of just in the middle of the fight, you can say, take your pants off to get a little bit more mana regeneration throughout the middle of the fight, especially if you find yourself in a very safe position. Then you can go ahead and strip a few pieces of armor just to get a little bit more mana in the middle of the fight. However, when you go down to these softer armor, lighter armors, it does heavily restrict your playmaking ability because the risk is so great of you getting into close range if you're using, say, Necromancy, or if you're going in for a Flame Strike. You may just die instantly, in which case it's not worth it to wear such a soft armor. However, you are free to experiment and wear different mage kits. There are many different mage playstyles, and there's many different locations and POIs in the game, which warrant a different kind of playstyle. So what you may wear in the dungeon, or in any different dungeon, there are different varieties. Some dungeons are structured for a much more close fight than others. And any open world POI, obviously there's the whole world to kite, and there's different terrain and elevations and buildings that you can use. So you can tailor your kit to whatever content that you're doing and with the group that you are playing with. Okay, on to trinkets. So for the amulet, I would recommend for the points, it's not really too important since we are not that stressed out for getting points on this build. So I would take whatever you can get here. For this is the main important part, is the defensive stats. I would highly recommend getting a very high slash defense and a very high pierce defense. Okay, so get these two as high as you can. 9 would be as high as it goes. Whatever else you can get on the amulet would be very nice. So if you get extra blunt defense, that's pretty good. If you get extra free armor weight, that can translate to extra. So once you have these, I would highly recommend you get either ecumenical damage percentage. This is probably going to be the most valuable stat you can get, third stat. If you're really into necromancy, you can replace this with necromancy. And for your fourth and fifth stat, if you're rich enough to afford a 999 of this and then get more stats, you can decide for yourself. But some good options are ecumenical mana reduction, very good. Necro damage, necro mana reduction, also very good. Blunt defense, decent. Free armor weight, kind of whatever these days. And aside from that, like, none of these are really that important. Now, as for our rings, the most important stat you're going to want to look for is going to be max health. You'll want to get this as high as you can, with 11 being the max roll. Next, I would recommend getting max mana. Again, 11 being the max roll. Finally, if you can afford it, I would then recommend either going for raw intelligence or raw dexterity, or both if you can afford it. But the max rolls on these would be 4 as well. And this ring would be incredibly expensive. So this is very unattainable for a new player. So we're not going to leave these, we're going to leave those stats alone, and I'm just going to put like 1 psych on there, or like 2 or 3. So I'm just going to put a few points of psych on there and call it a ring, okay? And for the other ring, you'll do the exact same thing. Essentially, if you're at the point in the game where you can afford 1111 max health, max mana, then you should be able to make your own decisions as to what stats you want on your ring. However, for the meta, for new players and for a meta mage build, if you have 1111, that is definitely good enough to do all the PvP and all the PvE in the game. Some other things to consider on your Dex Mage is, since Dex Mage is the best farming class in the game, then I would highly recommend getting a looting set, which would look like Loot Luck 9%. And then the next stat you would want is RTGL, Rare Trinket Gem Luck. You would want this at a max roll of 6%. And then if you can afford it, you can also get Loot Amount at 9%, with any stat on it is fine. Probably Raw Dex would be your best bet. If you can get perfect looting rings, then you will make a lot of money playing Dex Mage. So having a looting set, very valuable. As for orbs, there are many different stats that you may care about on the orbs. I would say getting your orbs is going to be your lowest priority as a newer player. But some stats that I recommend would be But some sets that I would recommend is if you do have a looting set and you fight a lot of humanoids for trinket drops, then you'll probably want to at some point invest in loot luck orbs. So I have a humanoid loot luck orb here, and then ball loot luck when killing bosses orb is also very good. You could also get a loot luck at night, and I would not recommend getting a loot luck while killing creatures because generally the loot luck from killing creatures is not that valuable. So some other stats you may care about is this increased spell power per cast on AI without being hit. This one is decent. You can also do increased damage to AI when they're below 50% health. That one's okay as well if you do a lot of farming. The spellcasting range is kind of whatever. The swimming orbs are pretty good. Not so much the breath time, but there is a mana regen while swimming orb and a swimming speed orb, which are both very good for playing in the water. Also, the mining orbs are very, very good if you do a lot of mining. However, those ones are very expensive. Okay, this is how I set up my bank. You may use this as a template and then optimize it for your own personal needs, but these are my reagents that I carry with me just about everywhere I go. And you feel free to like plus and minus these however you like, depending on your needs. Then I have my plate scale blood silk set. This is usually what I use in team fights and when I do things with the guild. And I also keep a plate scale iron silk set. This is a cheaper set, which I use when I'm doing solo things and I'm just trying to like learn the game or run around or have an adventure or whatever it is. This one's cheaper, so I don't mind like losing it. I also recommend bringing some consumables with you. So this is health food, mana food, stand food, and a potion. So if you have 15 thirst, this is a DH Peri potion, which Ebifar has a really good video on consumables, which will explain all of this. However, I highly recommend at the bare minimum having some form of health food, which if you don't have health food, you can fry some pork that you can get from a pig outside of town, from a bush pig. That's perfectly fine. Now, I will not be going over keybinds in this video. Mage keybinds can get kind of confusing, and just about everybody I speak to has a different setup for their keybinds. So you can copy mine. However, I highly recommend just coming up with your own. We will be talking about the combat skills very briefly because this is the big change to the previous Dex Mage build guide, where before you would put a tower shield on your back and you would tank hits and heal yourself. However, now that we have access to some of the combat abilities, I highly recommend that you take Quicken, Energize, and Brace at the bare minimum. And when you're PvPing, you need to be casting with your hands out. Sorry, one second, let me get some water. You want to be casting with your hands out so that you can cast your combat abilities while in combat like this, okay? You will also have like higher move speed with your hands out and better stam regen. So this is the current meta playstyle for using a Dex Mage. It may change. If it does, I'll be sure to make a video on that. If you have any questions or if you disagree, please leave a comment. I might get to it. Or you can message me on Discord or join my guild or join the guild Discord and ask in there. People are very helpful in this game, and it's pretty difficult to get information regarding builds and how to play the game in general. I won't be going over playstyle in PvP for how to play the Dex Mage. You can look at my channel on YouTube if you'd like to see some gameplay, or you can look up Mortal Online PvP and other videos. And yeah, I hope this was helpful, and good luck at Knave, and just enjoy the game for what it is. It's a really great game, and I hope you enjoy playing Dex Mage. Okay, peace.